The weakest species. In a galaxy ruled by ancient empires, strength was everything. Not intelligence, not creativity, not compassion, only power. The Carthel crushed worlds with gravity weapons. The Virex hunted entire species for sport. The Illyrian Dominion enslaved anything that couldn't fight back. And then, there was humanity. We were discovered late. A small blue planet, primitive technology, no unified government, constant internal conflict. To the galaxy, we were a joke. No natural weapons, no claws, no fangs, no armor. Even our skin could be torn open by accident. The Galactic Council classified us as non-threatening, low survival probability. We were ignored, overlooked, dismissed. And for a while, that saved us. Because while the galaxy fought for dominance, humans did something else. We adapted, we learned, we watched. We studied alien tech through intercepted signals. We reverse-engineered fragments of crashed probes. We built faster ships, not the strongest, but the smartest. But none of that mattered, because eventually the galaxy noticed us. Not because we were strong, but because we were alone. No alliances, no protector species, no defense treaties. Just one small world surrounded by predators. And predators always hunt the weakest first. The first fleet arrived without warning. It blocked out the sun. The First Contact War. The Virex didn't send diplomats. They sent hunters. Their ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling knives, slicing the sky apart. Cities went dark. Satellites vanished. Every major military system on Earth disabled in seconds. We didn't stand a chance. At least, that's what they thought. The Virex expected surrender. They expected fear. What they got was resistance. Disorganized, chaotic, desperate, but human. Fighter jets, obsolete by galactic standards, still launched. Pilots knew they wouldn't come back. They went anyway. Ground forces mobilized, not to win, but to delay. Every second mattered, because while the world burned, something else was happening. Something the Virex didn't understand. Humans weren't trying to defeat them. We were learning them. Every weapon fired, every signal transmitted, every movement of their ships was recorded, analyzed, adapted to. Within 48 hours, we started hitting back. Not hard, but enough. Enough to surprise them. Enough to make them hesitate. And in war, hesitation kills. The Virex had conquered hundreds of worlds, but never had prey fought like this. The turning point. By day 3, the impossible happened. A Virex ship fell. Not from overwhelming force, not from superior firepower, but from a flaw. A tiny, almost invisible weakness in their shield harmonics. Something no advanced species had ever exploited, because no advanced species would think that way. But humans did, because we had always been weak. And weakness teaches you something strength never can: where to strike. Once we found it, we shared it, globally, instantly. No politics, no borders, no hesitation. For the first time in human history, we fought as one. Missiles were recalibrated mid-flight. Experimental weapons were deployed without testing. Civilian networks became tactical systems. The sky lit up with fire, and one by one, Virex ships began to fall. They didn't understand. Their technology was superior. Their biology was stronger. Their experience was unmatched. So how were they losing? The answer was simple. They were fighting a species that refused to act like prey. And that terrified them. The message. On the 5th day, the Virex did something unexpected. They opened a channel, not to surrender, but to warn. Their leader appeared on every screen across Earth, tall, armored, unmoving, a predator speaking to prey. "Humanity," it said, "you have proven unusual. Not strong, not powerful, just unusual. You adapt too quickly. You resist too fiercely. This is not survival behavior." There was a pause. Then it said something that changed everything. "You are not prey." Silence. Across the entire planet. "You are something new." And then, "We will return, not as hunters, but as exterminators." The signal cut, and just like that, the war ended. The Virex fleet retreated, not defeated, not destroyed, but afraid. Preparation for war. In the weeks following the Virex retreat, Earth did not celebrate its survival, because deep down, humanity understood that what had just occurred was not a victory, but a warning. The enemy had not been defeated. They had withdrawn. And there is a profound difference between an enemy that retreats in defeat and one that retreats to prepare. Across every continent, every nation, and every orbiting station, humanity began to change at a pace that no alien species had ever witnessed before. Old rivalries, once thought permanent, dissolved almost overnight under the weight of a shared realization. Survival was no longer guaranteed. Governments opened their most classified archives, revealing technologies and experiments that had been hidden for decades. Artificial intelligence systems that had once been restricted were now fully unleashed, tasked with a single objective: to study the Virex and predict their next move. Shipyards expanded into orbit, assembling fleets at unprecedented speed. These were not elegant vessels like those of the advanced alien empires. They were functional, modular, and designed to evolve mid-battle. Every human ship was built with one principle in mind: adaptability over perfection. At the same time, humanity began studying itself. Biology labs pushed the limits of human endurance, enhancing soldiers not to become invincible, but to survive just a little longer, react just a little faster, and think under pressure just a little more clearly. Because humanity had learned something critical during the first invasion: perfection was not necessary. Survival, even by the smallest margin, was enough. Signals were also sent into the galaxy, not as pleas for help, but as declarations of presence. Humanity was no longer hiding. Humanity was no longer unknown. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, those signals were being heard. Not just by the Virex, but by others. It happened sooner than anyone expected. Only 3 months after the first invasion, long-range sensors detected something emerging at the edge of the solar system. At first, it appeared to be a single fleet, but as the data became clearer, the truth was far more terrifying. It was not a fleet. It was an armada. Thousands of Virex warships, each larger and more heavily armed than those from the first invasion, moved in perfect formation toward Earth. They did not attempt to hide their approach. They did not send messages. This time, there would be no warnings. Humanity had prepared, but even the most optimistic projections had not accounted for an attack of this magnitude. The scale alone was enough to overwhelm any known defense. And yet, there was no panic. There was fear, of course, but it was controlled, directed, and transformed into action. Every system activated simultaneously as Earth's defenses came online. Orbital platforms aligned their weapons, fleets moved into position, and millions of individuals took their roles without hesitation. This was no longer the fragmented response of a divided world. This was coordination. This was intent. As the Virax Armada crossed into engagement range, humanity made the first move, not with weapons, but with silence. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The Armada continued its advance, expecting the same chaotic resistance as before. Then, without warning, space itself seemed to shift. Human ships did not charge forward in a reckless assault. Instead, they scattered, repositioned, and adapted in real time, executing strategies that no centralized command could have coordinated fast enough. Because there was no single command, every ship, every system, every soldier was thinking and acting together. The trap. The first shots of the Second War were not fired in anger, but with precision. Humanity had learned from the first invasion that brute force would never be enough to defeat the Virax. So instead of trying to overpower them, they focused on controlling the battlefield itself. As the Virax Armada advanced, they unknowingly entered a carefully constructed trap. Hidden satellites, deployed in the months following the first invasion, activated simultaneously, emitting signals that interfered with Virax targeting systems. It was not enough to disable them completely, but it introduced just enough inaccuracy to create doubt. And doubt, in the middle of battle, spreads faster than any weapon. At the same time, human ships began executing hit-and-run tactics, striking isolated targets before disappearing back into the void. They did not attempt to hold positions or engage in prolonged combat. Every move was calculated, every engagement temporary. The Virax, accustomed to overpowering their enemies through sheer dominance, found themselves chasing an opponent that refused to fight on their terms. Frustration grew within their ranks, and frustration led to mistakes. Small errors at first, barely noticeable in the chaos of battle, but humanity noticed them. Humanity always noticed, and each mistake was exploited immediately. The Armada began to lose cohesion, not because it lacked strength, but because it lacked understanding. They were not fighting a weaker species. They were fighting a different kind of mind. Something else enters the war. As the battle intensified and the Virax Armada struggled to maintain control, something unexpected appeared at the edge of the conflict. At first, it was dismissed as debris or sensor interference, but within moments it became clear that a new fleet had entered the system. The ships were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. Their design was smooth, almost organic, and they emitted no detectable energy signatures that could be easily analyzed or understood. For a brief moment, both humanity and the Virax paused, because this was not part of the plan. The new fleet did not immediately engage. Instead, it observed, positioning itself just outside the primary combat zone, as if studying the battle. Then, without warning, it moved. Not toward Earth, but toward the Virax. And in a single, overwhelming strike, one of the largest Virax warships was erased from existence. Not destroyed, erased. No explosion, no debris. Just gone. Silence spread across every channel, every sensor, every command system. Because in that moment, a terrifying realization took hold. Humanity was not the only species that had been underestimated. And whatever had just entered the war was far more dangerous than the Virax.
The Silent Fleet. As the unknown fleet entered the battlefield, both humanity and the Virex found themselves facing something neither had prepared for, and for the first time since the war began, the chaos of combat slowed into something far more dangerous: uncertainty. The new ships moved with unnatural precision, gliding through space without visible propulsion, without detectable emissions, and without any of the signatures that conventional sensors relied on. It was as if they were not traveling through space, but simply choosing where to exist. Human command systems attempted to analyze them in real time, but the data made no sense. There were no clear energy readings, no identifiable weapon systems, and no communication signals. It was not just advanced technology, it was something entirely unfamiliar. Then, without warning, the fleet acted again. Another Virex ship vanished. No flash, no sound, no trace. Just absence. The Virex, who had once overwhelmed entire civilizations without resistance, began to pull back, their formations tightening as if facing a predator far more dangerous than themselves. And in that moment, humanity realized something chilling. For the first time since the war began, we were not the underdogs anymore. We were witnesses. A new reality. Humanity quickly understood that this new force was not here to help and not here to communicate, but to observe and intervene only when it chose to. Military leaders debated whether to engage, retreat, or attempt contact, but none of those options felt viable. This was not an enemy that followed recognizable rules of warfare. Meanwhile, the Virex began to change their tactics entirely. Instead of pressing their overwhelming advantage against Earth, they shifted focus toward the unknown fleet, launching coordinated attacks in an attempt to eliminate this new threat before dealing with humanity. But their weapons, capable of shattering planets, seemed ineffective. Strikes landed, energy collided, and yet nothing happened. The unknown ships simply remained, unmoved, untouched. It was as if the laws of physics bent around them. And that realization spread quickly across every human command center. If the Virex could not harm them, then neither could we.
The first signal. For hours, the battle continued in a strange, fragmented state until something unexpected happened. The unknown fleet sent a signal, not to the Virex, to humanity. Every screen, every system, every device capable of receiving data suddenly activated at once, displaying a pattern that no one immediately understood. It was not language, not exactly. It was mathematics, pure, universal, undeniable. Prime numbers, sequences, structures, an introduction, a statement of intelligence. Human scientists worked frantically to interpret it, and slowly, piece by piece, a message began to emerge, not translated, but understood. The message was simple, direct, and deeply unsettling. You are different. Not weak, not primitive. Different. Judgment. The message did not end there. More data followed, more complex, more structured, as if the unknown species was not simply communicating, but evaluating. Humanity began to realize that this was not first contact. This was assessment. The unknown fleet had been watching, not just this battle, but perhaps humanity itself for far longer than anyone could imagine. And then came the second message. You survive through adaptation. You resist through cooperation. There was a pause in the transmission, long enough for tension to build across the entire planet. Then, conclusion. Potential exceeds projection. No one celebrated, because no one knew what that meant.
The decision. The Virex had faced resistance before. They had encountered civilizations that fought back with desperation, with courage, even with brilliance. But what they had never encountered was uncertainty. And now, for the first time in their long history of conquest, the Virex were no longer in control of the battlefield. Their commanders watched in silence as another warship vanished from existence, not destroyed in the way they understood destruction, but removed so completely that even its gravitational imprint was gone, as if it had never been there at all. This was not a weapon. This was something else. Something far more dangerous. Within the Virax command network, signals surged rapidly between ships as they attempted to analyze the unknown fleet, but every calculation failed. Every prediction collapsed into contradiction. The data did not behave logically, and for a species that relied on precision and dominance, that alone was enough to trigger something they had not felt in generations. Instinct. Not the instinct of a hunter, but the instinct of something that suddenly realized it might not be the apex predator anymore. Still, the Virax were not a species that retreated easily. They had not built an empire across hundreds of systems by hesitating in the face of the unknown, and whatever this new force was, it had now become the greatest threat in the system. Not humanity, not Earth, but them. And so, they made a decision, a final one. Across the Armada, power levels surged as every ship began diverting energy away from defensive systems and into weapons. Massive cannons capable of shattering planetary crusts began charging simultaneously, their glow visible even from the surface of Earth. Human observers watched in stunned silence as the scale of energy being gathered surpassed anything recorded in the previous invasion. This was no longer a battle strategy. This was annihilation. The Virax were preparing to erase the unknown fleet in a single, overwhelming strike, and if that failed, they would erase everything else with it. For a brief moment, time itself seemed to stretch, as if the entire solar system was holding its breath. Then it happened. The Virax fired. A storm of energy unlike any humanity had ever witnessed erupted across space, beams of concentrated destruction tearing through the void, converging on the silent, unmoving ships of the unknown fleet. The brightness alone was enough to blind sensors, forcing human systems to switch to indirect readings just to comprehend the scale of what was happening. It should have been enough. By every known law of physics, by every standard of warfare, by every measure of power, it should have been enough. But it wasn't. As the energy storm collided with the unknown fleet, something impossible occurred. The attacks did not explode. They did not impact. They simply stopped. Frozen in space, as if time itself had been interrupted. For a fraction of a second, the battlefield became a painting. Beams of light suspended in motion, ships locked in place. Reality itself paused at the moment of destruction. And then, everything changed. The space around the unknown fleet began to distort. Not violently, but smoothly, like a reflection bending across water. The frozen energy from the Virax weapons began to collapse inward, folding into itself, shrinking, compressing, until it vanished completely. Absorbed. Erased. Or perhaps undone. Before the Virax could react, before they could even process what they were witnessing, the unknown fleet responded. Not with noise, not with light, but with absence. Entire sections of the Virax Armada disappeared instantly, not in explosions or fragments, but in perfect, silent removal. Ships that had existed one moment were simply no longer there the next, leaving behind nothing but empty space where fleets had once stood. Panic spread through the Virax ranks. Formations broke. Commands overlapped. For the first time, their perfect coordination collapsed into chaos. They tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The unknown fleet did not pursue them in the traditional sense. It did not chase, did not accelerate, did not even appear to move in ways that could be tracked. It simply acted. And with each action, more of the Virax ceased to exist. Within minutes, the armada that had once threatened to overwhelm Earth was gone. Not defeated, not destroyed. Gone. Silence followed. A deep, suffocating silence that spread across every sensor, every communication channel, every human mind trying to comprehend what had just happened. The greatest military force humanity had ever faced had been erased as if it were nothing. And now, that same force turned its attention toward Earth. Aftermath. In the wake of the battle, there was no celebration, no relief, and no sense of victory, only silence. It stretched across space like a physical presence, pressing against every human sensor array, every command center, and every individual watching from Earth. The battlefield, once filled with chaos and destruction, had become something else entirely. Empty. Where thousands of Virax warships had once filled the void with overwhelming force, there was now nothing but scattered radiation echoes and fading distortions in space itself, like scars left behind by something reality could not fully process. Human fleets held their positions, not because they were ordered to, but because no one dared to move. Every commander, every pilot, every analyst understood the same thing at the same time. Whatever had just eliminated the Virex was now the most powerful force humanity had ever encountered. And it was still here. The unknown fleet remained exactly where it had been during the battle, its ships unmoving, silent, and unreadable. They emitted no signals, no detectable energy patterns, no signs of intention. It was as if they were not machines or vessels, but manifestations of something far beyond conventional understanding. Humanity attempted to analyze them again, pushing every available system to its limits, combining military intelligence, civilian networks, and advanced artificial intelligence into a single global effort. But the result was the same as before. No pattern, no structure, no explanation. The data simply refused to make sense. For the first time since humanity had reached space, there was something in the universe that could not be studied, not because it was hidden, but because it did not follow the rules humanity relied on to understand reality itself. On Earth, billions watched as live feeds from orbit displayed the silent standoff. Governments issued no statements, not because they were hiding information, but because there was nothing they could say that would make sense of what had just happened. Even the most advanced simulations failed to predict what the unknown fleet might do next. Would they attack? Would they leave? Or had everything that just happened been intentional? Time passed slowly, each second stretching longer than the last, until it became clear that this was not a continuation of the battle. This was something else. This was observation. And humanity, for the first time, was not fighting for survival in the middle of a war. They were waiting to see if they would be allowed to continue existing at all.
The test. The response, when it came, was not immediate, and that delay alone created a tension unlike anything humanity had experienced before. Time passed. Minutes. Then hours. Every second stretched longer as humanity waited, uncertain whether their message had been accepted, ignored, or condemned. And then, something moved. From within the silent formation of the unknown fleet, a single ship separated itself from the rest, drifting forward with smooth, effortless motion that defied any known propulsion system. It did not accelerate in any measurable way. It simply approached. Human sensors locked onto it instantly, tracking every possible detail, but as before, the data refused to behave normally. Distance calculations fluctuated, energy readings contradicted themselves, and visual confirmation lagged behind reality by fractions of a second that could not be explained. The ship was not just advanced, it was fundamentally different. As it moved closer to Earth, its scale became more apparent. What had initially seemed like a distant object began to reveal itself as something enormous, far larger than any human vessel, yet impossibly smooth, with no visible seams, weapons, or structures. It did not appear designed. It appeared formed. And then it stopped. Not at a strategic distance, not at a defensive perimeter, but close enough to be unmistakably intentional. This was not positioning. This was invitation, or perhaps a test.
The risk. Humanity understood immediately what was being asked, even though no words had been spoken. This was not a demand. It was an opportunity, or a challenge, possibly both. Within minutes, discussions began across every level of leadership, from military command to scientific councils. But unlike previous decisions, this one could not be delayed or endlessly debated. The moment itself demanded action. If humanity did nothing, it would be seen as hesitation. If they responded with force, it would be seen as hostility. There was only one option that aligned with everything humanity had claimed to be: trust. Not blind trust, but chosen trust. the kind that defines whether a species hides from the unknown or steps forward to face it. And so a decision was made. A single ship would go. No weapons, no fleet, no defense. Just one. The selection process was immediate and brutal, not because there were too few volunteers, but because there were too many. Pilots, scientists, and soldiers from across the world stepped forward, each willing to be the one to represent humanity in what could very well be the most important moment in its history. In the end, the choice was not about rank or skill alone. It was about mindset. The one who would go would not just be a pilot, they would be a message. The ship launched quietly from Earth's orbit, its engines minimal, its design simple compared to the fleets surrounding it. There was no dramatic send-off, no speeches, no global broadcast. Only silence. As it moved forward, leaving behind the safety of humanity's defenses, every sensor, every camera, and every human watching understood the same thing. This was the most dangerous journey ever taken. Not because of war, but because of what waited at the end of it. The small human vessel approached the massive alien ship, the difference in scale almost incomprehensible, yet it did not slow, did not hesitate, because this was what humanity had always done. Step into the unknown and refuse to turn back.
Contact. The distance between the human vessel and the unknown ship closed slowly, not because of any mechanical limitation, but because every moment carried weight. Inside the cockpit, there was no dramatic music, no heroic speech, and no sense of triumph. There was only focus. The pilot, chosen not just for skill, but for their ability to remain steady in the face of the unknown, watched as the alien structure grew larger with every passing second. What had once appeared smooth and featureless from a distance now revealed subtle details, though details was perhaps the wrong word. The surface of the alien ship did not appear constructed. There were no seams, no panels, no signs of assembly. Instead, it looked as though it had been shaped as a single continuous entity, its surface flowing with faint patterns that shifted too slowly to track, like a living system operating on timescales beyond human perception. Sensors struggled to maintain lock. Distance readings fluctuated, sometimes suggesting the ship was closer than it appeared, sometimes farther, as if space itself bent around it. The pilot ignored the inconsistencies. Instruments were no longer reliable, only sight, instinct, and purpose remained. As the human vessel entered close proximity, something changed. The alien ship reacted, not with movement, not with weapons, but with awareness. A section of its surface, if it could even be called that, began to shift, not opening like a door, but dissolving into a space that had not been there before. There was no physical mechanism, no transition from closed to open. One moment there was a solid structure, and the next there was an absence. An invitation, or perhaps an entry point. Mission Control transmitted final guidance, though everyone understood that control had effectively ended the moment the ship crossed into this space. What happened next would not be directed from Earth. The pilot took a breath, steady and controlled, and guided the vessel forward. Crossing the threshold felt like nothing, no resistance, no sensation, and yet everything changed. External visuals collapsed into something indescribable, as if the concept of outside no longer applied. Space, stars, even the massive structure of the alien ship itself, gone, replaced by something that the human mind struggled to categorize. Inside, the environment did not resemble a ship, or a room, or any physical space that followed known geometry. Distances were inconsistent. Surfaces seemed to exist and not exist at the same time. Light came from no identifiable source, yet everything was visible. The pilot realized with a growing sense of awe and unease that this was not an interior in the traditional sense. This was an interface.
And then, without warning, they were no longer alone. There was no physical being standing before them, no form to focus on, no shape to define. Instead, there was a presence, clear, undeniable, and immediate. It did not enter the ship, it was simply there. The pilot did not hear a voice, they did not see a figure, but they understood. Contact had been made.
Understanding. At first, the pilot attempted to respond in the only way they knew how. They spoke. Clear, measured words transmitted through every available communication channel, identifying themselves, their mission, and their intent. It was protocol, training, and instinct combined into a single action. But even as the words left their mouth, they knew it wouldn't matter. Because the response did not come through sound, it came through experience. Without warning, the pilot felt something shift, not physically, but cognitively, as if their mind had been gently opened in a way that allowed something else to enter without resistance or force. Images appeared, not on screens, not in front of them, but within. At first, they were simple: stars, galaxies, vast stretches of space seen from impossible perspectives. Then they became more complex, layered with meaning, context, and relationships that could not be easily separated. The pilot was not just seeing the galaxy, they were understanding it. Civilizations rose and fell in moments, not as distant historical events, but as lived experiences. They felt the growth of species, the expansion of empires, the conflicts that reshaped entire systems. And through all of it, there was a pattern: intervention. At key moments, when a civilization reached a point of imbalance, too destructive, too unstable, too dangerous to others, the same presence appeared, not to conquer, not to rule, but to correct. The realization settled slowly, not as a shock, but as an inevitable conclusion. This entity, this intelligence, had been shaping the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed, not as a god, not as a ruler, but as a force of balance. The pilot tried to resist, not out of fear, but to maintain their sense of self. The experience was overwhelming, vast beyond comprehension, and there was a risk, subtle but real, that individuality could be lost in the process. And yet, it didn't happen. The presence did not push further. It did not take control. It simply showed, as if it was not trying to dominate the human mind, but to communicate in the only way it could, through shared understanding. And then, for the first time since contact began, something new emerged from the flow of experience. A question, not in words, but in meaning. Clear, focused, directed. What are you? The choice. The question lingered, not as pressure, but as expectation. It did not demand an answer, but it required one. The pilot understood immediately that this was not a personal question. It was not about identity, name, or role. It was about something far more fundamental: humanity itself. What are you? The pilot's mind raced, not in panic, but in search of something that could represent an entire species in a way that would be understood by something so vastly different. Strength? Humanity was not the strongest. Intelligence? Not the most advanced. Unity? Not consistently. Every obvious answer fell apart under scrutiny, collapsing into contradiction the moment it was examined too closely. And yet, the answer was there. It had always been there. Not in perfection, but in persistence. The pilot focused, allowing their own memories and the collective memory of humanity they carried through training and knowledge to surface. Images formed, not curated, not controlled, but honest. War, peace, creation, destruction, failure, recovery. Again and again, humanity was not defined by a single trait, but by a cycle,
an ongoing process of becoming something new, often through mistakes, often through conflict, but always through change. The pilot did not try to simplify it. They did not try to present humanity as something it was not. They simply allowed the truth to be seen. We are unfinished. The response was not spoken aloud, but conveyed in the same way the question had been asked, through meaning, through shared understanding. We make mistakes. We learn. We change. There was a pause, not in time, but in processing. And then something shifted. The presence responded, not with approval, not with rejection, but with possibility. Two paths emerged within the pilot's perception. One was structured, stable, controlled, a continuation of the system this entity represented, where humanity would become part of a larger balance, guided, corrected when necessary, protected from its own extremes. The other was uncertain, chaotic, unpredictable, a continuation of independence, where humanity would remain free, but vulnerable to its own nature. The meaning was clear. This was the choice. Not forced, not imposed, but offered.
The choice and the turning point. After the pilot's contact with the unknown fleet, Earth waited. Not in fear, not in chaos, not in silence, but in anticipation. Every human being understood something had changed, something fundamental. Humanity was no longer just a fragile species, barely noticed in the vast expanse of the galaxy. The unknown force had tested them, assessed them, and allowed them to continue. But it was not a gift, it was a challenge. From the moment the message, "We do not conquer, we do not rule, we correct," reached every system, humanity had a choice. Would they stay small? Would they cling to fear and old ways? Or would they take this opportunity, this rare acknowledgement from a godlike intelligence, and rise to something greater than themselves? Leaders convened, scientists analyzed, and every pilot and soldier who had survived the recent battles shared the same thought. We will no longer be underestimated. And so humanity acted. Ships were rebuilt, refitted, and redesigned, combining human ingenuity with whatever hints of alien principles they could interpret. Fleets that had once relied on sheer numbers now incorporated advanced technology inspired by the unknown fleet, but filtered through human creativity, unpredictability, and adaptability. For the first time in history, humanity understood the power of choice, to act not because they were forced, but because they decided to define their own future. The pilot who had first made contact watched from the command bridge as fleets aligned, weapon systems activated, but this time not to fight the unknown, but to assert humanity's presence in the galaxy. The human species was no longer fragile, no longer small, no longer predictable. And then the first signal was sent back, not to the unknown fleet, but to the stars. We are here. We will grow. We will rise. We are humanity. The words were simple, the meaning monumental. The galaxy would remember. A new era of humanity. And then it began. Humanity's rise was not sudden. It was deliberate, calculated, relentless. Across planets and stars, humans expanded, not as conquerors, but as innovators, explorers, and builders. Fleets that had once been defensive became symbols of potential. Cities and colonies spread across systems, connected by networks of knowledge and collaboration that were unmatched in their creativity and speed. But the galaxy took notice. Other species, once dismissive of Earth, paused. They had watched humanity survive against impossible odds, endure attacks that had obliterated more advanced civilizations, and then stand firm when a godlike fleet had silently tested them. And now, humans were no longer the weak, the fragile, the insignificant. They were unpredictable, adaptable, resilient. And every act of growth, every technological breakthrough,
every daring expedition reinforced the same undeniable truth. Humanity could not be controlled. Humanity could not be ignored. Humanity could not be erased. In orbit above a vibrant, thriving Earth, the human fleets gathered, ships of every design, size, and function, each a testament to ingenuity, courage, and vision. And for the first time, humanity looked outward not in fear, but in anticipation of what lay beyond. The stars were no longer distant lights, they were a canvas, and humanity held the brush. And though the unknown fleet had disappeared, their legacy remained, not in domination, not in threat, but in expectation. Humanity had passed the test, and now the galaxy would learn what it meant to underestimate humans, once and for all. The journey was just beginning, and for humanity, the future was limitless.
And that's the story. Humanity rising, defying the odds, and reaching for the stars. If you liked this video and want more voiceover scripts, more epic HFY stories, and amazing visuals that take you across the galaxy, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new adventure. Your support helps us create more of these stories, more journeys, and more moments where humanity proves it can rise above anything. Stay tuned. The galaxy is just getting started.